Thank you very much. This is the notice of non-discrimination. You are invited to participate in our transportation planning process, regardless of your race, color, national origin, including limited English proficiency, religion, creed, gender, ancestry, ethnicity, disability, age, sex, sexual orientation, gender, identity, or expression, veteran status, or background. These are the virtual meeting guidelines. All participants will join the meeting with muted microphones. Please rename yourself to include your name, first name, last name, and affiliation. Participants can mute and unmute themselves. Always remain muted unless actively speaking.
Yeah.
To participate in the discussion, please select the raise hand function. You can find this by clicking on either the participants button at the bottom of the screen, and a window will pop up with a raise hand button at the bottom, or the reactions button in the toolbar. I will then call on participants as I see you. If you're on the phone, you can use *9 to raise your hand. And if you have any technical difficulties, please contact the amazing Erin McGuire via the chat box, via email at emaguyre@ctps.org or 857-702-3681. This is the accessibility statement. This meeting is being recorded. This meeting is accessible to people with disabilities. Zoom products are compliant with exceptions with the following standards: Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.1 Level AA standards and revised Section 508 standards. If you require any additional accommodations in order to participate fully in this meeting, please contact Erin McGuire. She's amazing. Via the chat box, via email at emaguyre.ctps.org or by phone at 857-702-3681. Thank you. Good morning. I'm Brian Kane from the MBTA Advisory Board, and I welcome everyone here. Erin, can you do a roll call of members to ensure we have a quorum, please? Or Silva, or someone who's amazing.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I can do that. Regional Transportation Advisory Council.
Leonard here, who thinks Erin's amazing, but Brian, you're even more amazing.
MassDOT Office of Transportation Planning.
Yep, Derek Cravat here from MassDOT Planning.
Metropolitan Area Planning Council.
Good morning, Eric Barrasso with MAPC.
And Metro West Regional Collaborative.
Dennis Giambetti from Metro West Regional Collaborative.
That's roll, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Derek. You got to get some sunglasses, man. You're gonna
I
burn your
know
retinas out or something.
it's just for this like 15-minute period that this angle is, so I'm waiting it out.
The things you do. You do. Thank you. We will move on to public comment. If there's anyone who would like to make a comment at this time, please use the raise hand function and we will call upon you. I see 11 participants in the meeting and no hands being raised at this time. As always, when we get to a item, if you'd like to comment, please raise your hand when we talk about it, and we'll try to get to you in a quick and reasonable way. This is item 3, action item first one, the summary of the April 27th, 2023 meeting. The summary was in your materials, and I wonder if any member of the committee would like to make a motion at this time. Don't all jump at once, folks.
I'll make a motion to approve the April 27th meeting summary.
Thank you, Eric. Is there a second?
I'll second that. Derek Cravat.
Thanks, Derek, with the sunny disposition. Erin, can you call the roll, please?
Yes. Brian Kane.
Yes.
Leonard Diggins.
Yes.
Derek Cravat.
Yes.
Eric Barrasso.
Yes.
And Dennis Giambetti.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you very much. I will move on to item 4, action item 2, the state fiscal year 2024 proposed operating budgets. Haral Gandhi will present this, and this is also going to come up at the meeting that follows of the MPO board, and we'll talk about that in a second. But Haral, the floor is yours, ma'am.
Thanks, Brian. I will present next year's state fiscal year 2024's operating budget for CTPS. and then welcome any questions after the presentation. The committee members can then vote to recommend that the Boston Region MPO approve the budget as presented at the full board meeting later this morning. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry. I'll present the key aspects of the SFY 2024 budget, which include projected revenue, expenses, and the overhead rate. I will also highlight some notable changes for SFY 24. And I just wanted to just point out that the state fiscal year 2024 begins on July 1st, 2023 and ends on June 30, 2024. I know we operate on federal fiscal years and state fiscal years, but this budget is for the state fiscal year. Next slide, please. So this slide shows the total funding for CTPS for the state fiscal year. The details of the funding sources are provided in the CTPS SFY 2024 revenue projections table, which was posted on our calendar, and a link is will also be provided in the chat box for your convenience. The total funding for SFY 24 is estimated to be about $7.85 million. This is 13% greater than the projected SFY 23 revenue that we had projected last year. The primary reason for the 13% increase is due to the Safe Streets and Roads for All grant that was awarded this year. We had a modest increase in the NPO funds after a significant increase last year, but the majority of the increase, the primary driver, is the Safe Streets and Roads for All grant that we were awarded. The NPO funds account for about 75% of the total funding this year. As in past years, it's usually about 75 to 78%. The remaining 25 funds are a combination of MassDOT, MBTA, and other smaller contracts. As mentioned earlier, the significant increase in the other miscellaneous category is due to the Safe Streets and Roads for All grant. The total amount of that grant is about $2.5 million over 2 years. And the state fiscal year 24 amount is estimated to be about $600,000. Not all of that $600,000 is going to be allocated for CTPS staff and overhead. I think we're going to be hiring consultants and engaging public engagement and vendors to do some of that work. So about $400,000 is allocated for that consultant work, and $200,000 is allocated for CTPS staff and overhead. But overall, the MPO, MassDOT, and MBTA revenue sources continue to have minor changes in funding for the past few years. Next slide, please. Next, I will talk about the projected operating expenses for the agency. Examples of operating expenses include salaries, benefits, physical space related expenses, IT related expenses, and the fiduciary agent fee. Next slide, please. These expenses are then categorized into 3 classifications. We have the administrative expenses at 51%, direct labor, and direct costs. The direct costs are also known as pass-through costs that are not part of the overhead rate calculations. The administrative expenses include office expenses, IT expenses, administrative salaries, and other expenses. And direct labor is the cost of staff time that charge directly to projects and contracts. When we divide the administrative expenses by the direct labor expenses, we can get the overhead rate for the fiscal year. Next slide, please. And the projected overhead rate for SFY 24 is estimated to be about 120.3%, which is an increase of about 1% from last year. And when I say last year, I really should say current year. State fiscal year 23 overhead rate is 119.34%. The total payroll for SFY 24 is projected to be about $5.5 million, and that includes full-time staff, interns, and per diem employees. This budget considers 61 full-time employees, and that includes 7 administrative positions. We currently have 11 positions and open positions, and are actively recruiting for 7 positions. In other words, the agency is currently operating at about 20% of its staff. I'm sorry, 80% of this. We're currently operating at 80% of our staff. Next slide, please. Next, I will discuss the notable changes in SFY 24 operating expenses. The details of the projected expenses are shown in the CTPS SFY 24 proposed operating budget table. That's also a link is provided in the chat box. Next slide, please. So line 4 represents a significant increase to utilize the third-party consultants that I mentioned earlier with the Safe Streets for All, Safe Streets and Roads for All grant. There's a $400,000 increase, which represents the amount for the consultants. The other $5,000 is anticipated to use Union Capital Boston as to help with some of the public engagement activities for the MPO work. MPO documents. Next slide, please. Line 8 has a significant increase to support incentives for public engagement efforts. There has been a renewed focus on equitable engagement and policymaking in recent years. There are also increasing expectations from community leaders, organizations, and advocates to compensate them when the MPO asks them to contribute to our decision-making process. Next slide, please. Line 16, unemployment. Given the market trends, we're cautiously budgeting for an increase in unemployment claims in SFY 24. We've had quite the turnover this past year, and we just wanted to make sure that we are budgeting for any unemployment claims. CTPS and MAPC fall under reimbursable organizations, which means that we're responsible for 100% of the unemployment claim. Hopefully this amount will not be used, but we're just budgeting for it cautiously. Next. Line 34, IT equipment repairs. This is an expense that we used to incur to repair the Braille printer periodically. Since we no longer use that equipment, we used to have a project called ACT, Accessibility for the T, and we don't have that project anymore, so we don't need to budget for the repair for the Braille machine. Next line item. Line 36, office maintenance and repair. The line item is significantly higher than in previous years to allow for upgrades to the office space to meet the current staff needs. It is unknown at this time if we are staying in the same office space or not, so in any case, we do need to budget for a potential expense for that office space. Next line, please. So I just have a couple more. Line 39, postage. We typically budget $500 annually for postage, but we used to mail hard copies of invoices to contracts and clients prior to the pandemic, and now with everything, we are just exchanging things electronically. And there's a decreasing need for mailing things out to clients or vendors and things like that. So we also have a healthy balance right now in our machines. So we've zeroed that out for this fiscal year. Next slide, please. And one more. Thank you. Lines 43 and 44, professional services, legal and compensation planning. We're increasing these categories to support recruitment and staff retention efforts. Line 43 includes legal fees for supporting visa sponsorships for staff. About $10,000 is budgeted for this purpose, and that would probably support 2 requests. And then line 44 accounts for the services of a compensation consultant to benchmark certain roles within CTPS against available job market data. Compensation consultants are engaged as needed year by year to maintain an up-to-date compensation plan for the agency. Next slide, please. And lastly, there's a notable decrease in line 57 because we moved the annual cost of our financial management system into the IT contracts line above. And that concludes my presentation of the operating budget. And then I welcome any questions.
Thanks, Aral.
Yeah.
I think this is definitely a maintenance of effort budget with a few really exciting improvements. I think bumping up the number for consultants makes a lot of sense, given the hiring challenges that the organization has faced. We all understand that there are sometimes things that have to get done. And if it can't be done in-house, which is always the preferred way, sometimes outsourcing it makes sense. I also think it's smart to budget for the compensation consultants. This is something that we sort of call for in an item we'll discuss later, or talk about in an item we'll discuss later. And it just makes sense. It's a very important part of retention, which, as we all know, is also equally as important, if not more important, than recruitment. Once you get somebody in and train them, you want to retain them to sort of make your investment worthwhile. So those are my few sentences worth of information. Does anybody have any questions or comments for Haral at this time? Leonard Diggins.
So we're not sure if we're still gonna be at 10 Park Plaza. Is that something that we want to discuss? No, I'm just curious. Of course, I wouldn't have any thoughts one way or another. If it's not the time to discuss that, that's fine.
We can talk about that, Len. Let me just sort of jump in at a high level, Haral, before you
Sure.
go. I mean, there's never any guarantee. The lease situation between CTPS and the building owners, which is MassDOT, are have never been, shall we say, good or great. There is going to be some work to spruce up the offices, which may require some temporary movement. But there also is a possibility that CTPS may someday need to look for alternative space, but I don't believe there's any plans for a long-term move right now, Len. But let me ask Haral to weigh in, please.
I can actually take that for her all, if that's okay, Brian.
Of
just
course.
Because these have been ongoing conversations that many of us have been having with in the leadership team have been having with the MassDOT leadership team. MassDOT, especially before the new administration, now with the new administration, has been talking about moving and renovating different offices in 10 Park Plaza. So there is this ongoing discussion with the leadership of the building about obtaining a different space in the building. Whether or not that happens, we would need to renovate the existing space that we have in the building if we were going to stay here, to make it more compatible with hybrid work, because we do not have very many small closed spaces where people can go to make private conversations when people are on lots of virtual meetings or hybrid meetings. And we also don't have enough rooms to have group hybrid meetings with the equipment that we need. So I agree, Brian, there's not, a plan for a big long-term move away from this particular space, but we need to plan for one or the other in the coming year. And that's what these costs accommodate right now, is either renovations or to move.
Thank you. That was informative and helpful. So some of the rationale behind your thoughts were very informative and helpful. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Len. Any other questions? Let me just sort of jump in here, and also just I want to thank Eric. You folks probably know that I have a forum with the TGM and the T board chair at 10. Today was the only day they could do it, so it's going to conflict with the MPO board meeting, which I regret I'm going to miss most of. If I'm back in time to present this item on behalf of the committee, I will do so. But if I'm not, Eric has very graciously agreed to step in and present it on the committee's behalf. And I just wanted to thank you, Eric, for doing that. I hope I'm there for the discussion, but I appreciate you stepping up.
No problem. Happy to do it.
Great. So if there's no further questions, comments, or concerns, Haral, are you good?
I think we should just vote on the committee.
Yeah, if you're good with everything, I'll ask for a motion to approve the budget as presented.
I'll make a motion to approve as presented.
Thanks, Eric. Is there a second?
Second.
Thanks, Dennis. Aaron, call the roll.
So actually.
Or Silva, call the roll.
Yep, Brian King,
Yes.
Leonard Diggins,
Yes.
Derek Cravat,
Yes.
Eric Barassa,
Yes.
and Dennis Giambetti.
Yes.
Motion carries, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Haral. Thank you, Tegan. We'll move on to agenda item 5, the action item draft operations plan. So you all have received or seen in your materials the final edits to the draft operations plan. The hope today is that we can sort of move this forward to the full board later this month. I don't think we're going to ask the board to sort of vote on it in total at the first meeting, but we do want to get it in front of folks to begin digesting it, reading it, looking at it, thinking about it, talking about it. So we'll run through this really quick. Thank you to everybody who got comments and edits in. And thank you very much to the staff and the editorial team for especially reading my chicken scratches. I appreciate that. It's not easy. My mother hoped I'd be a physician, but obviously that didn't work out. I'm in the much more lucrative field here. So I noticed on the version online, there were some comments on the side. Can we maybe move to those? And we can maybe talk through those. And if we can sort of move that forward today, maybe we can get this going.
So actually, sorry, let me help with the
Yeah,
navigating
please.
for staff, navigating the document. Most of the comments are relatively straightforward, but I think just worth touching on, the first one being on page 10. So if you can scroll up to that, Aaron, if you are controlling the document. The area where we do actually have, I think, some discussion for this committee to confirm before the end of our time today is actually on pages 32 and 33. So we should hopefully quickly cover the other ones and then get to that hopefully brief discussion. And if you want to, Brian, feel free to walk everyone through it, or I can walk through what the comments are if you prefer.
Well, why don't you correct me when I inevitably say something wrong. So these were some comments around, the fact that this never happens. Why are we putting it in the document? It's a valid concern, but I also feel like, and I know, Len, you've said this a few times during our long discussion of this, part of what the operations plan is meant to do is to sort of try to get ahead of unforeseen circumstances and have contingencies in place for those times when things that have never happened before happen and pop up. And it's great to have sort of, an instruction manual, which is what this can serve to be there. So while I agree that it is very unlikely that this will ever happen, that both, David and Eric and Steve and all the good folks there won't be available at the same time. I think it is important that we at least try to plan for it. And I also don't feel like it's a huge issue that the board choose amongst its membership for a presiding officer for one meeting. There will not be massive policy changes made, and there couldn't be anyway because it would all have to be posted in advance. So I don't see this as anything that needs changing, but that's just how I feel. I don't know how other members feel.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think we'll ever actually do this, but it's good just in case there was ever a situation, particularly if we had an in-person meeting and everyone was there and something, happened and there was like some pro forma stuff we needed to just get done. It could be just a very simple thing. And I agree with you. It's not like people could just suddenly bring up new things because they need to be posted on the agenda.
So Leonard.
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, and it just answers like, what do we do? We now know what to do. And in the case where a rare situation like this happens, and Brian, you can throw me under the bus anytime. You can say to Steve, that's what I want.
Only if it's an electric bus. How about that? With in-motion charging.
Thank you.
Derek.
Yep. Yeah. No. Thanks for the additional information. Yeah, I can certainly pass along to Steve since he had discussed this with me. I think his main concern had to do with sort of the technicalities associated with some of the tip process and things like that. That I think he feels like the chairs, the normal kind of chairs, usually know inside and out, and it might be challenging for someone to just like a member to hop on. But I think there's enough members that know the process pretty well that if the situation did arise, somebody at the meeting would know that process. So I don't think it's a huge sticking point. But just wanted to pass along. I think that was the focus of his concern, was more to do with the sort of in the weeds nature of the process sometimes. But I'll
Yep.
yeah, I certainly don't have major concerns with it, but just wanted to clarify. Yep, thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
But help
Um,
Steve, you can tell him I will never accept nomination to be a chair in such circumstances.
I think we
So you
put
don't
it
have
in
to
the
worry
plan that it has to be Len Diggins.
There you go. Add a footnote. Yep.
All right, let's move to page 12, I think is the next one. Board member expectations.
Yeah, I think this
Yeah.
was my comment.
Go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, I felt like I don't think it's appropriate for, to be able to say to an MPO member that they can't speak to the press. Like if there's some, a project or something that we're doing and media reaches out and says, hey, I want, I'd love to get your perspective on that. I think I agree that, we shouldn't speak on behalf of the board and say like, oh, the Boston MPO feels like this. I think you need to speak on behalf of yourself or your agency. But I don't think you can say you can't speak to the press, and you should say thank you. We'll have the staff up. I think it's great to say here that encourage people to contact the MPO staff so that they're aware of that. But I just think if it's a public body, and if media reach out to people, they have to decide what they want to say.
Wouldn't it be a great situation to be in if the Globe and the Herald are writing about the work we do? Megan, what do you got for us?
It's very rare.
Yeah, thank you. And I just wanted to say that when staff took a look at Eric's comment here, staff had proposed the more specific language that was in here. And I think when we were originally proposing it, it was really thinking about more like the process of sort of tracking it and being able to engage in it, and not necessarily trying to restrict board members so completely. And we realized it should just be simplified, that it was really overly specific for this particular instance. And so A says, please don't represent the board unless approved, but to represent the board. And B just says, hey, please let staff know if you're contacted so that we know and can work with you on that if needed. So we were pretty supportive of Eric's reaction there, and did propose something we think fits the intent of his comment.
That seems pretty reasonable, Eric. Good catch. Seems like most of us are nodding in agreement, so I think we can accept that change. And we can move on to, I think, is it the next page? No, 33. This looks like a piece of modern art.
I think we might want to start with,
Did I miss one?
well, no, 32 is actually related to 33. So let's start with
Okay.
33, actually, as you said. Sorry about that.
No.
Would you like me to summarize?
Yes,
this,
please.
Since it is a work of art.
Yes, please.
So essentially, we received feedback. It was if you look at this document, there's a couple of comments around comments 9 and 11 in particular, which is around, the idea of laying out these quarterly meetings to discuss updates, and then having an annual meeting that provides a look back on the prior year's projects. And the comments were around, don't we sort of accommodate this already in tip readiness days? And, this happens more on an ad hoc basis already. And so do we really need this level of specificity? So what we based this text on initially was the MOU itself states that the updates on projects will be provided both quarterly and on request. And so that's kind of what led us to the quarterly framework here, was based on the MOU language. Also, the MOU specifically calls out that there is that once a year look back before board members actually vote on the new tip on how projects fared the prior year. And so building off of that MOU language, we tried to make something generic enough that was specific enough to accommodate the quarterly language, but also generic enough to recognize that maybe the tip readiness days do in fact meet the requirements of the MOU. But the tip readiness days didn't necessarily exist when the MOU was initially created, and then they might not exist in the future. So we didn't want to call out something like tip readiness days because that might not be the structure that we see in 5 or 10 years. So that was the balance we tried to strike here. We left in this reference to quarterly updates because that isn't what it was in the MOU, but the comments pushed back on that and pushed back on wanting to take away that sort of more specific quarterly reference. That's where the discussion really lies here, I think. And maybe Derek, maybe you can summarize some of that feedback since I think it came through you. But if you do want to move away from the quarterly language, I think you also should tie that to considering what changes need to happen with the MOU, which actually specifically call out that level of frequency of project updates. So that's my summary of how we received the feedback and tried to address it. But I think others might want to speak to the feedback itself and the justification there.
Derek?
Sure. Yeah, just before I comment on just a quick question. Is the MOU, can you remind me if there's a plan for that to be updated, or is it just
Yeah.
this plan? Okay. Yep.
So the
that's-
plan is right now, we're going to confirm this in agenda setting, but we're far enough along that I feel comfortable saying this. The June 15th meeting, we expect to be a meeting where we can bring up both the corrective action text that's required in the MOU, as well as some quicker, non-debatable updates to the MOU. So for example, when you need to change reference to a legislation or regulation or something like that, that's been updated. The board then can discuss whether or not there will be a longer process to address the other recommendations that are in the federal certification review document around the MOU. So we'll have the short-term discussion, but this quarterly could be a part of the short-term, but it might be more a topic of conversation than we can do in that first round of updates. It's unclear to me, and it would have to be decided by the board.
Okay, that sounds good. Yeah, could you just scroll up real quick, just a little bit? Okay, so the quarterly meetings where staff will share project updates. So is this proposing to introduce new meetings, or would these quarterly updates sort of be on the MPO meeting agendas every quarter and at those times?
The intent of this language was to build it into existing MPO meetings, but call out that it needed to happen, at a certain cadence that it doesn't currently happen. So I would say that right now, while there's kind of ongoing updates in an ad hoc format of this, the MOU specifies quarterly. So we tried to sort of adapt that into the existing structure of the MPO meetings.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think this looks good. I mean, I think almost every other MPO, I think, has an agenda item every month for the district staff to provide an update on all of their projects. And I think that it's pretty reasonable for that to be the case. I mean, at Court, I know there's probably 10 times more projects in the Boston region than there are in other regions. So monthly would be challenging. But I think the way it's phrased here, I think it's definitely responsive to the comments that because of the coordination that happens at the POP meetings and at all of the other opportunities for CTPS and us to collaborate on project level details, I think that this definitely makes sense. It's just I read this as every quarter, Ethan will essentially provide an update, right, and then MassDOT will, John Bouchard, others will be there and answer any questions that folks might have, right? Is that the intent? I think I'm reading that right.
That's the intent of the edits here, is to make it even more clear per your comment that it would be more like information be fed to staff. Staff could present that, questions could be asked that the implementing agencies would then answer.
Right.
Trying to make that very clear.
Okay, great. Yeah, no, I think this is great and appreciate the responsiveness to that. And I think, it definitely seems like a tough balance to strike, because I think in 2011, there's been so many changes since. I mean, I can't speak to what was taking place. I don't even know if tip readiness days was happening then, because I started at MassDOT in 2017, but I know that process did solve a lot of those challenges. And so I think this seems to walk the line well. So just appreciate it. And I think I'm certainly okay with these changes. And thank you. Yep.
Cool.
Yep.
Yeah. 12 years ago in 2011, It was a different world. Derek, you were in diapers, I remember. So, no, that's ageist, excuse me, probably, and that's mad at me now. But I think the intent here, like you said, is to just get on a cadence of sort of regular updates. And perhaps this plan was a little too prescriptive. And I think the changes are making it more in line with making it clear that it's a best practice more than meant to be punitive or anything else. And I hope that is clear to folks. Anything else on this one? Are you folks clear sort of what we mean here, what our intent is? Yep, okay. All right, what do we got next? 30.
That is it in the MOU.
It's-
We shouldn't go quite next to the next action item yet because, sorry, I said MOU, I meant operations plan, because we should get the general consensus that you feel comfortable with this as a draft. Brian, I might also add that we have a few more editorial kind of comments from you, which are pretty basic. And then we will still also run this through an additional editorial process. So you will see additional edits, but they will not intentionally change. They will not change any of the intent of the document or the real meaning of the document. So this is where we might ask you all to actually vote to say that you are supportive of sending a further edited draft to the board for the June 15th meeting.
You're calling me basic like my teenage kids now, Tegan.
Oh, you actually, by the way, you actually owe me clarification on one of your chicken scratches. I didn't understand one of them, so you owe me that too.
Okay. Yes, so safe in the knowledge that there will continue to be work done on this, but not in a substantive editorial manner. Is there a motion to approve the operations plan draft and present it to the Boston Region MPO for its consideration?
So moved.
Second. Dickens.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Leonard. Silva, can you call the roll, please?
Brian Kane,
Yes.
Leonard Diggins,
Yes.
Derek Cravat,
Yes.
Eric Barassa,
Yes.
and Dennis Giambetti.
Yes.
Motion carries.
I note Tegan's celebratory emoji. Okay, so we'll move on to comms norms. Similarly, this was included in your materials. Let me just, before we jump into this with both feet, let me just sort of say, I gotta depart in 6 minutes at 9:45. And so I would ask that you folks continue this conversation. I don't know if you want to elect a new presider or whatever you want to do. But if I just pop off, please know that it's not because I don't want to continue this discussion. I just can't be in two places at once. Okay, let's see here now. Comms norms. There are not similar comments as there were for the last document. I know I gave some editorial questions and comments in. Thank you, everybody who did as well, by the way. Tegan, do you want to say anything about the comms norms?
Yeah, the only changes that we would move forward from what you see here is that there is a request to, again, be more consistent around saying the chair or vice chair or their designees, because that typically the designees are the ones sitting in those roles. Other than that, nobody provided any substantive comments to edit this. And so similar, we would ask if you feel comfortable sending this as a draft to the full board for discussion.
Yeah, and I think this is really just asking folks to be nice, which we all need more niceness in our world. So that's how I feel anyway. Leonard, you're smirking at me, sir.
In agreement, Mr. Kane, in agreement. Yeah, so
A smirking agreement. Well, would you like to make a motion at this time, Mr. Diggins?
I would love to make a motion, that we approve this communications plan draft and send it off as a draft.
For consideration by the full Boston Region MPO board.
I'll second that.
Thanks, Eric. Silva, call the roll, please.
Brian Kane,
Yes.
Leonard Diggins,
Yes.
Derek Cravat,
Yes.
Eric Barassa,
Yes.
and Dennis Giambetti.
Yes.
Motion
took-
carries.
2 minutes, half of which was me saying I need to leave soon. So well done, everybody. Okay, that's it. Is there any member items? Second,
I'm not a member, but I wanted to just clarify my celebratory emoji and just say thank you to this committee for this long haul that you all committed to and have engaged in to produce what in some ways may seem just kind of procedural and perfunctory, but it actually is a really, really important set of documents to guide the MPO in its work. So I just wanted to thank you all and thank my staff for what has been more than a year's worth of work to produce these drafts. So thank you.
oh, thank you, and thanks, everyone who's here, and Jonathan Church did a lot of this work too, and we thank him. There's just so many people. So thank you all. Okay, next meeting will be determined. We will get back to discussing budgets at some point and spending. And we will also perhaps be dipping our toes into the MOU. It's up to the full board if they want to send it to us or create another ad hoc committee. I'd be just fine with that. But unless there's any further items, is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, without objection, we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you all. Well, hopefully we'll be here in an hour. But
Yeah,
good luck
please.
at the next meeting.
Please record the
Everyone.
advisory board meeting. Oh, he's gone. Oh, well.